Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Curtis Hill, and I am the Outreach Coordinator at Disability Rights North Carolina. And we'll be having a discussion about the upcoming 2024 general election calendar and for your voting opportunity for the November general election in November the 5th. And so we're going to talk about off the top, we're going to talk about making sure that people have a plan for voting. And then we're also going to talk about accessibility once one begins to vote, and we're also going to highlight some key dates in the voting process. And it should be interactive, so if one has questions, comments, or concerns, this is a space that we're able to talk about those that one might have. And realizing that voting is a fundamental American issue in America. And so we want to make sure it's a right, and we want to make sure that our rights of people as a person with a disability, that folks understand that they have a right to actually vote independently in community and with the express accommodations that they might need to vote. I mean, we want to make sure that's highlighted because we realize that the disability community is one of those untapped communities where we don't really vote in the numbers that we should have, that we should. So we want to make sure we're removing all barriers in the state of North Carolina to ensure individuals with disabilities have access. And when we're talking access, we're talking about blind individuals might need different assistance. It might need a different assistance. Also, if one has mental or intellectual disability, they might have different accessibility needs to the ballot. And we want to reassure them that they have this right to vote. Okay. The next thing we'll always talk about our key dates for voting. As you are aware, that you currently now can request an absentee ballot request for the upcoming election, and you can make that request up until the 26th, the 26th. Is that right? 20. I'm not looking at my note. Can I see the screen?
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, that date is October 29th is the actual date, the deadline to request absentee ballots in North Carolina. October 11th is the voter registration deadline. And October 17th through November the 2nd is where early voting for the early voting, one-stop voting starts in North Carolina. During that time period, one is able to register and vote during that time. And then on election, and then if you don't vote during those times, one can vote on election day. But we're encouraging all of our voters to vote during early voting or the preferred through absentee balloting, if that's what you preferred, or if you're blind, one has the opportunity to vote through online, if that's what they choose to do through our online portal for your ballot. Okay. And you might say, well, why are we having this conversation? Like, why is this an important conversation? Well, because people with disabilities encounter challenges when we go to the polls and vote. But we want to make sure we're removing all of those particular barriers that one might encounter. Next slide. All right. So think about it. Are you ready to vote? Are you ready? Are you ready to exercise your right to vote? The first thing that one has to do is check to make sure you're registered to vote. That's the first step in the voter registration process. So, how do I do that? What steps do I take? How do I check it? Make sure I'm not being purged from the polls or removed from the polls if I haven't voted in a while. So let's go check that out and see how. And Kira will drop that in the chat for us, the link. But the website is in the North Carolina State Board of Elections website, and takes you to your voter lookup. That is going to be vt.ncsbe.gov. And there, one is able to look up, type in your name, your first name first, your last name, and your county. And then that would bring up to see whether you're registered to vote in North Carolina. If you're not in that system or have been removed, one needs to re-register to vote. So that's very important. And they have removed a lot of people from the polls from the last time. So we're just trying to reassure you to make sure that you're registered to vote. Okay? And then we've got another big change in North Carolina for voting this year. This is where one has to have a photo ID present. And you might say, well, what kind of photo ID do I have to have? Well, in North Carolina, the statute is that one has to have um, that you have to have an, what's the ID? It's a regular driver's license ID or she's got it now. It's accessible forms of ID. All right. Voters have to have an ID, no fee ID. So they have at the DMV, they don't charge for these IDs. You can just go to the DMV if you've got supporting documentation to get an ID from the DMV. It's called an identification card, or one can use your driver's license as a acceptable form of ID. And one can also use the state at your local county board of elections. They're also able to and authorized they're also able to authorize an ID for you too for voting purposes only. Okay, and then you can also use a U.S. passport for voting. And if you are a new resident of North Carolina and have moved within 90 days and you have an ID in another state, that ID will also be acceptable form of ID for voting purposes in North Carolina during this election. And then also, the Board of Election has approved certain colleges and universities and businesses. They've approved those IDs as acceptable forms of government issued ID for voting purposes. So one needs to look at if you're in college, to check to see if your college is on the state list. Kira, can you drop that in the chat for us so people can have it, or the link to it? And that's located on the State Board of Elections website also. And you can look there and then have a list of all the approved IDs that are there. And it's my understanding that the ID for Chapel Hill has not been approved. Their digital ID has not been approved if you're at UNC Chapel Hill. Okay? And so sometimes your state and local government ID is also an acceptable form of ID that you're able to use. Military veterans ID cards are used in the U.S. government. Those are available. Your tribal enrollment card that's issued by the tribe. Those are acceptable forms of ID. ID card issued by the agency of the U.S. government or state of North Carolina for a public assistance program. Those IDs are also acceptable. So we have an array of acceptable IDs, but if one is having difficulty with their ID, they're able to reach out to Disability Rights North Carolina, and we're able to help them and assist them with rides to the polls to get an ID, to help you get paper documentation for an ID. This is something that we think is fundamental to make sure we're removing any barrier that one might have to receive an ID. Next slide. Okay. All right. Do you need help with your absentee ballot? And you might say, well, why do I need an absentee ballot? So absentee ballots go for individuals who might need assistance with voting and those kind of things, or I might be out of town, or I might need somebody, I might can't get out, so I need to go ahead and do my ballot in my home. That's the acceptable form of absentee balloting that happens. Also, if you use the alternate format pieces of voting that they have in North Carolina, like if you're overseas or in the military, those are also what they consider absentee ballot, as well as when one is using, say I'm in a nursing home and I can't leave my nursing home, or a MAT team, a multi-agency, multiple assistance program. Yeah, they come out in the community from your board of elections. When they're coming out, those are what they call absentee ballots that happen, that people do. And you might say, well, why is that important? Well, absentee ballot makes it available for anybody. You don't have to have a reason for an absentee ballot in North Carolina. You don't have to give a reason. You just say that I need one. You don't have to have your medical records and all that. It's a pretty free flowing process of that deal. But one has to request that by the October 29th deadline because the Board of Election has to get that back to them, um, has to get it back and processed, and you have to get your ballot back in the Board of Elections by, it has to be at the Board of Elections by November the 5th. It cannot be dropped off any other place. You can get assistance from anybody to help you fill out the request form or the ballot of your choosing, as long as a person is not your union rep or your employer and those kind of things. But pretty much one can get about anybody you want that you feel comfortable with to help you with your ballot. And then they would sign and say they did it, they helped you. But also, when you're returning your absentee ballot, your ballot will be mailed with a copy of an exemption form that we use for voting purposes, that say that if I don't have an ID, I'm able to fill that out with a reasonable impediment, and then therefore you will be able to, you will also be able to vote, but you have to send that form back with your ID, with your ballot, in your ballot. So that's a very important process that they're doing this year. It's a new process, so that's happening. So you got to make sure that you have that done, and then you want to seal your ballot, and you want to not give it to anyone, and you also want to make sure that one has two signatures on your ballot. And then also, at the State Board of Elections website where we did the voter lookup earlier, that place also has a place where your sample ballot, where one is able to print down your ballot and just look, and then we look and see who's on it, and it's going to be identical to the ballot that one will have on election day, okay, or whenever one decides to vote. That ballot is the same. And so you're able to take that ballot with you into the polling location. That's important. That sample ballot, you can take it in there, and can tell you, you can take it and vote that same ballot. It's going to be the exact replica of the ballot that you'll see on election day. We also want to remind you that one needs to flip the ballot over, because sometimes there's things on the back of the ballot that people need to discuss or you need to vote on. So it's important that we're encouraging people to complete the complete ballot of voting. All right. All right. And then also remembering that October 17th and November 2nd, there will be early voting locations across the state of North Carolina during that time, but early voting begins October 17th through November the 2nd. Now, that's for a statewide, but it depends on, not every county will have voting every day, especially on the Saturdays and Sundays, and the locations differ across the state. That's why one has to actually, if you're going to do if you're going to do voting during this time, one has to do that in the county that you're in. So if I live in Wake County, I can't go to Orange County and vote. So you got to get your ballot. You got to go to a site. You can go to any site, early voting location that's in your county, and vote. So you don't have to go to the one that's closest to you. You can go wherever one you feel comfortable with voting. Now, on election day, one has to vote at your precinct. That is a assigned precinct. You might say, well, how do I find that? The precinct that one votes is also on the State Board of Elections website at the bt.ncsbe.gov website. That has all of that information about where your voting location, and it tells you, and you can even see who you're voting for. Also, at DRNC, we have we vote. We have access the votenc.org. Right there, we have a statewide resources about people, candidates that are on the ballot in the upcoming election. It ranges from governor all the way down to statewide candidates that are there. In some counties, they have specific information of more local candidates, but it's county specific. But that's a good starting place as you're thinking about preparing yourself to vote. Because what we do want, We want you to exercise your vote, but we want you to have the best information possible in order to exercise that right to vote. It's very important that we have an educated electorate, that you understand the issues, because I would offer to you that disability issues are at the forefront of the voting process for people with disabilities. Think about it, because the people that we put in office decide what resources are coming to our communities and to our that affect the daily lives of people with disability. That's why we want you to be informed about the issues and how they relate to people with disabilities across the state of North Carolina, and their platforms, to make sure that their platforms um, coincide with the values of people with disabilities. So that's why this is very important. And then also, if one needs a ride to the poll, DRNC also has an opportunity for you to ask for rides. And that's provided by our partners, as well as other community folks that we connect with. And then if you encounter a problem while you're voting, or have questions before you go in the poll, or get intimidated and those kind of things, you can also come and ask us that. You can also call Disability Rights North Carolina at our 800 number, and it's 888 we vote too. 888 we vote too. That's an important number. If you have any issues at the polling location, you want to give us a call while it's going on, so we can do a remedy to make sure that your vote counts. It's very important. We realize that this is an important election, and we want to make sure that people with disabilities issues are on the ballot, and you don't have any problems as you're trying to exercise your right to vote. Also, we have a guardianship for people that might have a guardian, and you might say, "Well, I got a guardian. Can I vote?" Well, it depends. For the majority of the folks that have guardians, you have a right to vote. You don't have to get your guardian's permission in order to vote. You can exercise your right to vote just like anybody else. For a small exemption or a small section of folks, individuals, if if a judge has taken away one's right to vote, those are people that aren't able to vote. But for the vast majority of people with disabilities, they're able to vote just like anybody else that's around. And that's important to say. And also, think about too, while you're voting, if you decide to do curbside voting, that means that I can sit in my car and vote, right? It means I go to the polling location, they ring the bell, a person, a staff member from the Board of Election comes out and gets my information, goes back in the Board of Elections, brings out the information, my ballot and stuff, and verifies everything. I show my ID. The next thing is they bring my ballot. I'm sitting in my car. Anyone in my car that I would want to assist me, because it's my ballot, I can say, well, I'm gonna get this person to assist me, and they can assist me with voting. That's important. And also realizing that people cannot take pictures of you while you're voting, because that's illegal. So we don't want people intimidating you. The staff cannot be looking at you while you're filling out your ballot and all those kind of things. And if you happen to say, I make a mistake while I'm voting, you can request another ballot, and they have to offer you a ballot. And then also within every polling location in North Carolina, there is an accessible accessible polling location that's there, that has equipment that you're able to do an accessible ballot. And that's called the express vote. The universal voting system is in the majority of the counties. And there are variations of this system across the state of North Carolina, but we want to make sure that you're familiar with it. So say, well, I don't really feel like circling in, but I can go to this machine and I can tell it what to do, and it will write it in for me and fill it out and give it to me, and I put it in the ballot. So it's important from all these different ways that we want to ensure that you understand the fundamental right to vote. We think, or we know at Disability Rights North Carolina, that we're calling on all people with disabilities to go out and vote this election, because our issues are on the ballot. Our issues are on the ballot, and we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to vote. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns?
Curtis, I have a question. If someone picks up an absentee ballot and then they decide they're going to go ahead and vote in person, are they allowed to do that? Like, and just throw away the,
You are.
okay.
Yep. You can do it. Because they will spoil that. What they'll do is they'll spoil that ballot, and then they just won't. I mean, when it, it's as long as you don't, then don't send that ballot back. All right. No other questions? Thank you again for your time. Remember, go vote on October 17th through November the 2nd is our early voting, and also on November the 5th is election day, and making sure that we exercise our right to vote. Also remembering that if you happen to stay or you happen to have a long line for voting on election day, we want to make sure that people are staying in line and not leaving the line as it goes in. And we'll information will be there to make sure it should be a smooth process. We don't anticipate a lot of problems this year in the upcoming election. But we want to make sure everybody has an ID, and if you don't have an ID, you're able to fill out the exemption form for it, or they might ask you. And when you fill out the exemption form, you get a what is it called? You get a provisional ballot, and then you have opportunity to bring the actual form. But if you do the exemption form, it should go through because you have a disability or some reason why you're not able to get an ID. All righty. Thank y'all again.